back to Diesel Talk. On my way to Colorado, I'll go do some classes, but thought I'd talk about something that we were discussing the other day about pressure over at a shop. We had some boost problems, and obviously I'm scooting right along here. It's kind of nice driving here through Utah. Speed limit's 80, literally 80. But anyways, I'm doing about 75 right now. And obviously, one of the things we look at is boost. In other words, turbo boost. So as I'm moving along right here, thought I'd talk about boost. First of all, there are two pressures or unit of measurement for pressure. One of them is gauge pressure and the other one is absolute pressure. Actually, I have both right now. I'm watching gauge pressure, my boost here, as I'm driving along the freeway right here. But anyways, the other thing is I got my tuner here, and you'll notice that I'm reading pretty much absolute pressure. So therefore, when I look at absolute pressure, I'm pretty much looking at, what's going on with boost plus atmospheric pressure. So let's discuss it on our computer later on here. But for now, absolute pressure versus, again, gauge pressure. And by the way, scenic right here in Utah. So I'm actually between Cedar City and Beaver. So pretty nice stuff. So, but anyways, let's talk about it here on the laptop and talk about boost gauge pressure versus, yes, you said it, absolute pressure. Okay, so I'm at 7,900 feet here off of the Highway 20, by the way, beautiful view. Take a look at that. All right, so like we were talking about, let me zoom back out of here, get my finger on there. All right, so therefore, here's the difference between gauge pressure. You can see I'm reading 0, which is adding atmospheric pressure, subtracting atmospheric pressure from it. So therefore, 0 gauge pressure is whatever atmospheric pressure you are. Now, obviously, I'm at 7,900 feet. So if I look at my tuner here, hopefully the sun will let me see something there. We're going to zoom on there. We're reading what? 12 psi, right? So therefore, we're reading 12 psi. So that is absolute. So since I'm at a higher altitude, the pressure drops. Now, in case you don't know, your sea level pressure is 14.7, but given the fact that I am at 7,000, go zoom over there, 900 feet, that tells you that absolute pressure is adding, whatever atmospheric pressure is where you're at. So therefore, we're at 12 psi. Another thing I also tell technicians is that when you do diagnostics, you also want to verify your barometric pressure reading on your scan tool. See if it matches. There you go. All right, welcome back to Diesel Talk. Tony Salas here. How you doing? I thought I'd talk real quickly about pressures. When we look at these engines right here and we're talking about boost pressure, sometimes we don't understand even how we read pressure. So let's talk a little bit about gauge and atmospheric or absolute pressure. Actually, it's 3 of them. Yes, gauge, absolute, and atmospheric pressure. So let's talk about that. Okay, so as we talk about boost pressure, we can see that today's plumbing system, like on this LML, we got we talk about in the past videos about the EGR flow and so on, and the intake airflow coming in. So therefore, as we take this off here and we look down the intake here, we need to understand that boost is everything. So therefore, as we talk about boost, we look at pressures, right? So in this case, you'll notice that this gauge here, and let me set her flat here for you. And you're going to see that we actually have a pressure and a vacuum, and you'll notice that vacuum is measured in, as you can see closely, inches of mercury, and then we got PSI right here. So therefore, one thing we need to understand, obviously this gauge is a hair off, we can see the hair off there, and what you're looking at is 0 is pretty much atmospheric pressure. So this is a gauge, pressure gauge. So therefore, we're not reading absolute because we have no idea what atmospheric pressure is. So, but again, this is standard. You buy them in any old auto parts, you can buy a vacuum pressure gauge. All right, so as a technician, one of the things I've had to buy is actually a gauge, boost pressure gauge, because of the fact that I needed to go above 30 psi. If I'm testing a LB7 Duramax, minimum is 20 psi, though we tweak them up to about 25 to 27 using a boost actuator like the one that Banks sells, the big head Banks. But in this case, when I test drive, I always like to look at gauges for the simple reason that I don't like to trust, electronic views on the scan tool, because I want to know what the variable vanes are doing and what the wastegate is doing as well. But again, what is zero pressure? Well, zero pressure is whatever atmospheric is. Okay? Okay, so let's get one thing clear about pressure. Why are we even talking about this? Just in case I didn't mention it. The reason why pressure is important is because, in a diesel nowadays, boost is everything. Okay, boost is everything. If I talk about an old 7.3 or a 6.5 normally aspirated diesel back in the day, they had decent power, but with today's engines, it's important to understand that we as technicians need to confirm that there is adequate boost. The problem that I get with technicians and people that talk to me is the fact that they're telling me, hey, I got only 15 pounds of boost, but then I'm like, is that including atmospheric or not including atmospheric? So it is in the hopes that you understand that atmospheric pressure can be read in absolute or inferred with gauge pressure. So let me show you. First of all, let's get it clear. Like I mentioned before, there are two methods to read pressure. How does it relate to diesel? Boost, right? You need boost. Again, anything above atmospheric pressure. Okay? Boost pressure on scan tools is either read in gauge or absolute. So you can read gauge G pressure or A pressure. You might want to interpret it depending on the scan tool. So the question is, that sets the set point. So what is the set point? Am I reading absolute pressure or am I reading gauge pressure? So let's move on here. So as I move on here, let's start off with sea level. Any pressure, like it reads in the center here, any pressure above 14.7 would be considered boost. It's a positive pressure, meaning greater than atmospheric. But where was the starting point is where atmospheric pressure is. So any pressure above it is considered a positive pressure. Now, any pressure underneath it is considered a negative pressure, also known as a vacuum, and that's what you're going to read. So the question is, what is a standard atmospheric pressure? Well, we start off always at sea level. What is the pressure at sea level, which is 14.7 psi. So you can understand, I'm here in Las Vegas, okay? Las Vegas sits above 2,000 feet of elevation. Not far from us, about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive away is Death Valley, and Death Valley is under sea level. So we got best of both worlds here. We got under sea level and above sea level pressure. So yeah, so therefore pressures do change. Now, why is this important too? It's because the computer needs to meet emission standards, and it also needs to give you the best fuel economy that it needs. So if it's going to give you the best economy, it needs to calibrate that, which we call in gasoline the stoichiometric ratios, or the correct fuel to air ratio. So does humidity affect the air? Does the pressure and altitude you're at affect the air? So yeah, that's why you got, manifold absolute pressures. You got barrel sensors and you got exhaust pressure sensors. And in some cases, we also need to know our airflow using a mass airflow. But for pressures, the big ones are the MAP, the barrel, and exhaust pressure if equipped. So there you go. But again, what is the standard? Where do I start off on? Well, we start off at sea level, and sea level is 14.7. But like it says on the lower right here, a vehicle may not always be at sea level. Okay, so what happens to atmospheric pressure as you travel to higher altitude? The pressure will drop, and you'll see that in the video I did, while driving to Denver. So therefore, sea level pressure is 14.7, but again, a lot of us are not at sea level. So therefore, that means, what happens to cities like Denver? Denver sits at 5,280 feet of elevation. So has the pressure dropped? Yes. And just to make it a little bit more confusing, you ever watch the weather person on TV tell you the weather? And they're saying, hey, we got a high pressure system moving in. We got a low pressure system moving in. So even though, like us here in Las Vegas, we are above sea level, it isn't surprising they'll be above 14.7 because, again, a high pressure weather system is moved in. So therefore, that changes the pressure readings. But again, that's why we have pressure sensors on diesel trucks and gasoline as well, because it needs to know the calibration of fuel, knowing how much air or what the air pressure is pushing down. Because remember, it's 14.7 psi at sea level pushing down on us. So that means us as human beings also, we need to have adequate pressure to, live. So therefore, that's why we have that. Anyways, moving on. So therefore, what is the set point? As Google even says, I did a Google search like it says on the bottom, the simplest way to explain the difference between the two is that absolute pressure uses absolute zero as its 0 point, meaning that it's including already atmospheric pressure. While gauge pressure uses atmospheric pressure as its 0 point because it's already inferred. So as I show you that gauge, you're going to see that the gauge, a vacuum pressure gauge, is showing 0 all the time when it's not attached to anything because it's already reading and inferring the atmospheric pressure where I'm at. So if I take a gauge pressure and I go to Denver, which is at a higher altitude, less pressure, it's going to read 0. If I go that same gauge and I go to San Diego, California, where I'm at sea level, it's going to read 0 as well because it's already inferring or adding the atmospheric pressure wherever you're at. Why is this important again? So I like to use gauge pressure to know what boost is, but you better confirm what the atmospheric pressure is, because I've had a few trucks that had fuel economy issues, ran okay, where we had a skewed baro sensor or map sensor. Not very common, I won't lie to you, it's not very common, but we have had chased a few where they just felt doggy when I drive. And one of the things I look on my PIDs, in other words, my scan data, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, hey, does that show, the correct atmospheric pressure wherever I am? So understand once again that when you read, when you apply it in this case, if you're at sea level, 14.7 psi. So if I were in a diesel and I'm at sea level and it's got 20 pound of boost, like an LB7 Duramax, right? It's supposed to have 20 pounds of boost minimum. So therefore, the total boost that's going to be reading under atmospheric would be 34.7, which means 14.7 at sea level where I'm at, plus 20 psi of boost equates to 34.7 psi. That would be my boost reading using absolute. But what about if I read in gauge? Well, atmospheric pressure is already inferred, so therefore you're just going to read the actual positive pressure above sea level, which in this case would be just 20 psi. So big difference, right? So if a guy tells me, oh, I'm getting 35 pounds of boost on my old diesel, I'm like, wait a minute, there's no way that truck generates that much boost. So immediately I'm like, are you sure you're reading it correctly on your scan tool? And turns out he's giving me absolute. So the question is, are you reading the correct boost levels? Today's trucks are easily going over 30 psi of boost, and it's imperative that we read that. So when I get trucks coming in, that's my diagnostic thing. I just did one, 2 weeks ago, and one this week too, as a matter of fact, where we did have a leak, but the problem is the guys were reading absolute pressure and said, yeah, I got adequate boost. I'm getting 25 pounds of boost. And I'm like, if that's 13 psi of atmospheric, you're probably getting just 7 pounds of boost, it sounds like, because the truck is doggy. So therefore, we need to know what gauge we're reading, okay? So therefore, always understand your baseline is, if you're going to use absolute, your baseline is, what is the atmospheric pressure where you're at? So therefore, one of the easiest things you can do is just go on your, your weather app or your, your computer and just go to weather.com, whatever it is you use. And in this case, today, right now, we got a high of 82 degrees. Our pressure is 29.77 and dropping. It says the arrow is pointing down, so it's going to drop. So if I take 29.77, I asked Siri, hey Siri, what is 29.77 inches of mercury to psi? And and Siri's going to tell me. So therefore, that's what we see. Anyways, yeah, use Siri there. Oh, let me turn off Siri because we don't want Siri to be talking here.
29.77 inches of mercury is 14.62 pounds per square inch.
See, Siri came through. So there you go. So therefore, Siri is telling me what's going on. So with that said, you can convert it, and I should see that pretty close to scan tool. Now, obviously, it's not going to be entirely perfectly accurate. It's going to be really close to it. So I should see 14 point something there. So that's how you confirm. Now I do this with key on, engine off. Key on, engine off. I look at it, see where I'm at. If not, I could have a skewed map sensor. And I'm not going to lie to you. I've had some trucks where I needed a map sensor, and in this case, I called the local auto parts, wherever I got it, a dealership, wherever it was, I don't remember. And I say, hey, listen, this one's wrong. It took sometimes 3 sensors by the time I got the correct reading. And boy, the customer was really happy because 1 psi to 1.5 psi makes a huge difference in fuel economy and power as well. So power is everything, Now, as you looked at the vacuum pressure gauge, I'm not going to lie to you too. This is where it gets confusing. Let me stop here for a minute. Let's say I want to lay carpet in this room here in my bedroom, here in my office, right? I want to lay carpet. And I tell the carpet guy, hey, I want you to measure the length in feet and I want you to measure the width in meters. Carpet guy is going to look at me and say, what are you talking about? Well, I want to know how much carpet I need, but measure it in feet and the other meters, length and width. He's going to think I'm full of crap.
You know, it's like, wait, you're not making sense. Do you want it in square feet or you want it in square meters? What do you want? You know, or yards, you know, that could be another one. So what happens with pressure is that anything above atmospheric pressure, wherever you're at, whether Denver or in San Diego, like I said earlier, anything greater is considered a boost or PSI or a positive pressure. Anything under is considered a low pressure, which is, again, a vacuum. Well, when we measure vacuum, that is measured in inches of mercury, right? Well, some guys get lost, you know, because Lord knows when I took automotive 101 back in the day when I used to have a lot of black hair and I used to weigh 20 pounds less or 30 pounds less, you know, there used to be vacuum analysis on an old carbureted car. You know, we could analyze a lot with a vacuum pressure gauge on a gasoline engine, you know. And in this case, you're reading the suction. So therefore, the engine on the intake stroke, if you know the 4 strokes of an engine, you're sucking. You're creating a suction as that piston goes on the intake stroke with the intake valve open. That creates a big suction inside that intake manifold when the engine is idling on a gasoline application. So they said you're supposed to be between 15 to 22 inches of mercury at idle at a steady gauge. And if the gauge was fluctuating, you had some valve train problems, you had other issues going on. And you can even tell if it's running lean or running rich, the mixture. But what I'm trying to get across is it was very confusing for us because it was inches of mercury. It's like, well, we measure PSI pressure, but what is inches of mercury? We're using 2 different scales, you know, and those scales are positive pressure, PSI. Negative pressure, anything under atmospheric, is measured in inches of mercury. That's why a lot of modern vehicles now will display kilopascals, you know, and kilopascal or a pascal is a pressure that measures both low and high. 14.7 psi is the same as 100, close to 101 kilopascal. So 100 is atmospheric pressure. So if I want to read a boost, excuse me, it'll read a greater. If I want to read a vacuum, it'll go lower. But it's all one scale, not like the gauges we still buy at the local auto parts, which shows PSI and shows what else? Inches of mercury. So to sum up here, and hopefully you understand this, is, you know, atmospheric pressure is, again, it's 14.07, excuse me, and which is the equivalent of 0 gauge pressure. Again, absolute pressure versus gauge pressure, right? So therefore, anything above that, as you can see the arrows pointing here, and you're welcome to pause it, you know, and analyze it. You know, the question is that, you know, are you reading a positive pressure, which is greater than atmospheric wherever you're at? So as you saw in the video, you know, you saw that I was at 12 psi at 7,000 some feet, right? So therefore, the pressure dropped because I was at a higher altitude. But in this case, you know, it's all measured in HGs, you know, when it comes to low pressures, though. So therefore, anything under 0 gauge pressure or 14.7 is considered low pressure or vacuum. Excuse me, allergies. But anyways, so next time you have a boost issue, know your barometric pressure at idle. You know, as you just saw me use Siri and read the boost pressure, know what you're reading. Is it gauge or absolute? So if I get an email or I get a call, you know, hey, I got no boost, this is my boost readings, you know, and I'm like, okay, are you giving it to me in absolute or are you giving it to me in gauge pressure? Know the pressures that you are reading. Okay, enough of that, but it's something simple, I know, but so much overlooked, you know, it's so much overlooked. So with that, give me your comments, let me know what you think, and you know, have a good day. Okay, have a good day. Definitely have a good day. Subscribe. You don't want to subscribe, fine, don't subscribe. But anyways, definitely give me a comment what you think. Hopefully that's helpful for you. And God bless, and we'll see you next time. See you later.